Good evening. Governor General Sir Cyril E.M. Charles and Lady Charles, Prime Minister Philip J. Pear and Mrs. Pear, members of Parliament, members of the ECCB's Monetary Council Board and their spouses, Governor Timothy N.J. Antoine and Mrs. Antoine, Ms. Tracy Polias, Chief Director of Policy, and Mr. Alistair Munzi, her husband, Mr. Trevor Brathwaite and Sir Errol Allen, former Deputy Governors of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and their spouses, distinguished invitees, the media, the general public, all other members of the ECCB family, especially Mr. Everton Seeley, Country Manager St. Lucia, and his team, Mrs. Alvin and Richard Justin and Beverly Felix. Welcome to the third lecture in the ECCB at 40 lecture series, the St. Lucian edition. A special good evening and welcome to our panelist and moderator of this evening's lecture, Ms. Kiflin Carew, Dr. James Fletcher, Dr. Kim Gardner-Sadhu, Dr. Stephen King, and Ms. Lisa Joseph. The topic, Powering a Modern St. Lucia, in the words of our Chief Director of Policy, Ms. Tracy Polias, is a synthesizing of the thinking on the path to develop a modern St. Lucia as it recovers from the challenges wrought by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russian-Ukraine war, inflation, among others. On January 8, 2023, Prime Minister Pear declared that St. Lucia entered 2023 with renewed prospects of economic growth as the government maintained its commitment of putting people first. This can be juxtaposed with the theme of the Prime Minister's throne speech delivered on March 29, 2022, under the theme, Securing Our Future Together. The Prime Minister's desire was for St. Lucians to unite and move forward with purpose, putting aside squabbles and tempers for the good of all citizens. He desired transformation for a thriving economy built on knowledge and aptitude, technology and temperament, and confidence balanced with calculus. He, however, cautioned that economic efforts would come to naught without a sense of peace and safety. This evening, our panelists will be ably guided by the moderator as they address some of the critical issues to power a modern St. Lucia, touching on climate change, renewable energy, business competitiveness, social underpinnings, including health, education, the impact of crime, revitalization of agriculture, and the role of women in society and the economy. These topics are also congruent with some of the theaters of transformation outlined by Governor Antoine, including food and nutrition security, renewable energy and energy security, broadband connectivity for the digital economy. The panelists are ready. The moderator is ready. You are ready. We are ready. Let the lecture begin. Welcome and thank you.
Esnupawe? Esnupawe? Come, I'm not hearing Esnupawe. Way. That's right. Thank you very much, Dr. Valde Henry, the Deputy Governor General of the ECCB. And Deputy Governor, that was our rally cry in Creole, signaling our readiness. We are ready. The St. Lucia edition is the third in the lecture series with discussions previously held in Anguilla and Antigua Barbuda on the topics food security, the blue and green economy, and transforming health and wellness, use of traditional medicines, the silver economy. That was a first for me. I did not know this. So those are the respective topics in these islands. Tonight's theme, as you would have heard from the Deputy Governor General, rather Deputy Governor, pardon me, sir, is powering a modern St. Lucia, the purple and green economy. Now, what does it all mean? The key objective tonight is to identify not just hurdles, but strategies to a meaningful path for the country. What actions are needed to help us adapt, pivot, and innovate new productive sectors. The green economy, for instance, is premised on economic production focused on recycling waste to lower environmental cost. This model of economic development merges economic, environmental, and social issues to improve life. The purple economy is an approach to sustainable development that emphasizes diversity and cultural good, particularly in education, healthcare, and women's empowerment. It champions the interests of vulnerable groups like children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. So, against that backdrop, the essential question tonight is, 40 years from the establishment of the ECCB and 44 years after this nation's independence, has St. Lucia attained the level of development that it aspired to? Is St. Lucia and our generations of St. Lucians living up the promise to fulfill their potential? To help us see through, navigate, and arrive at workable conclusions is our esteemed panel. They are experts in their fields who have each made tremendous impact changing lives. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Dr. James Fletcher, Dr. Stephen King, Dr. Kim Gardner-Sadhu, and Ms. Kathleen Carew. So let's get to know them a little better. James Fletcher, PhD, was the Minister for Public Service, Information, Broadcasting, Sustainable Development, Energy, Science, and Technology here in St. Lucia from 2011 to 2016. During his tenure, he led an aggressive modernization of the energy sector with a focus on the transition to renewable energy. He commissioned modern ICT centers in several underserved communities, started a program for free island-wide Wi-Fi, initiated major water development projects, and established an employee assistance program, and that provides free confidential counseling to public officers. Dr. Fletcher played a leading role in the Caribbean's 1.5 to Stay Alive civil society campaign, and during the COP21 negotiations, he was selected by the UN Climate Change Conference president to be part of the ministerial team that helped to achieve consensus on the elements of the Paris Agreement. Historic it was. Dr. Fletcher launched the Caribbean Climate Justice Project, and that advocates for climate justice for the people most impacted by climate change. James Fletcher holds a PhD degree in crop physiology from the University of Cambridge and a BSc honors in biochemistry from the University of Ottawa. He is the author of Governing in a Small Caribbean Island State and currently manages his own consulting company, Solaricon. Dr. Stephen King, MBBS, RFCPC, OBE, and SLC. He's a pathologist. He is a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of Canada and an international fellow of the College of American Pathologists. Dr. King was one of the architects of St. Lucia's health sector reform proposals in 2000, the Universal Healthcare Proposal back in 2003, and the National Strategic Plan for Health in 2006. He served as the island's chief medical officer from 2004 to 2007. He founded Laboratory Services and Consultations Limited in 1993. He's one of the founders of the Medical Associates Limited, which owns Tapia Hospital. He's one of the co-founders and first chairman of the AIDS Action Foundation. They did such great work on the ground. And also one of the co-founders of Rise St. Lucia, Inc. Dr. King, he's an advocate for healthy human development, youth empowerment, and reduction in violence. Dr. Kim Gardner-Sadhu, MD, MSPH, FAAP. She is a pediatrician and the director of the Child Development and Guidance Center in St. Lucia. Dr. Gardner-Sadu is board certified by the American Board of Pediatrics, and she's a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics. After her training, Dr. Gardner-Sadu returned to St. Lucia in 2006, where she first worked as a community pediatrician within the Ministry of Health. She then transitioned to become the director and pediatrician of the Child Development and Guidance Center, a non-profit medical facility that specializes in the assessment and early intervention for children with developmental disabilities. She has been at the center for the past 14 years and has also delved into health research. She has published papers and presented locally, regionally, and internationally on multiple topics, most recently on the outcomes of children with prenatal exposure to Zika virus. Finally, we say hello to Ms. Keithlyn Carew, MBE. She is an advocate and change maker in the area of gender equity within agriculture and rural development in St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Kitts and Nevis. She's also the founder of Helen's Daughters, a non-profit organization that focuses on rural women's economic empowerment through advocacy, capacity development, and improved market access. While her background resides in the field of international relations, having served 5 years at the United Nations in the areas of peacekeeping and political affairs, she has never forgotten her farming roots, which is what led to the creation of Helen's Daughters. She's an ICA Goodwill Ambassador for the Sustainable Development and a featured entrepreneur in Forbes Island Innovation Series. Ladies and gentlemen, I present our esteemed panel. Just some brief housekeeping matters now as we proceed. Each panelist will deliver a 15-minute presentation. After all the presentations, it will be your turn. You here with me, our audience at home, those who are further afield virtually, you will be posing questions and interact with the panelists. I now invite Dr. James Fletcher to the podium.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Your Excellency, Harold Charles, Acting Governor General, and by the way, my first boss when I left Inland Revenue. I worked at the Inland Revenue Department in the PAYE section, and our Acting Governor General is my first boss. Good to see you, sir. You didn't know I would expose you tonight, right? Minister of Equity, Joachim Henry, PS in the Ministry of Finance, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the ECCB for, first of all, convening this lecture, and secondly, inviting me to speak on a subject that is very dear to my heart. I want to disappoint you a bit. I won't be speaking only of climate change. I know whenever I speak, people expect me to speak about climate change, so it's not going to be a climate change talk, although I'll say a little bit about climate change. Really, what I intend to speak about is powering a modern St. Lucia, but with new opportunities and new thinking. We cute guys with the presentation. Thank you. So, where are we? Yeah, it is on. Okay, it is on now. Sorry. Like many other small island developing states, St. Lucia is caught in a high debt, low growth, high unemployment trap. So we're really like a goldfish that's swimming in a bowl, not many resources, having to navigate our way among a whole set of other goldfish. That's who we are. And how do we get out of this? So I want to touch on a number of different sectors very quickly because it's only 15 minutes. And the first one I want to touch on is tourism, which is really what is driving our economy right now. And in 2016, we had a green economy scoping study done with the help of the United Nations Environment Programme. And it spoke of green tourism as something that we should be pursuing. And it said that it should be mainstreamed by the government as a crucial part of our drive towards sustainability. And some of the benefits of greening tourism were enhancing visitor experience, adding value to local business, supporting biodiversity, and reducing the negative impact on the environment. Because one of the things about tourism is that it extracts from the environment. That Green Economy Scoping Study is available, and I would recommend it as reading. The industry must make more prudent use of scarce resources, particularly water. We're in the middle of a water crisis right now, in the middle of a drought, and the tourism industry uses large amounts of water. And that's actually one of our hotels in the south, Coconut Bay, that with the help of the Ministry of Sustainable Development, back in my time, did a very good job of, guys, can we keep the presentation on? Don't go back to me, thanks. Did a very good job of using rainwater harvesting rainwater and using that so it would have a much more prudent use of that scarce resource. Making use of sustainable energy. Energy is the tourism industry uses energy quite a bit, and moving to renewable energy, using solar photovoltaic panels is another area that the tourism industry can move towards. Working with nature, not against it. Unfortunately, in all of our countries, this is Barbados, but St. Lucia is very much the same. We put our hotels right on the beach, the same places where we know will be inundated with sea level rise, with storm surges. There must be a greater symbiosis between the tourism industry and nature, because that's what the tourists come to St. Lucia for, and to many of our other islands, to see how nature, how we, the pristine beauty of our country. And Labrie is an excellent example of community tourism and what's happening in Labrie with Airbnb. And just last weekend, there was a tribute to Yves Renard, who was one of the people who was instrumental in this. Second sector is agriculture. And I know Keithlin in her presentation will go into this in a lot more detail. But I want to touch on it just a little bit to say that we must take a radically different approach to agriculture. And we must heed the lessons from bananas. I know there's a lot of nostalgia about bananas and green gold. But what happened with bananas? In the 1990s, bananas contributed over 10% of our GDP and agriculture 15%. Over 30 years, that reduced to 4% and 1%. Right now, it's very little. Our exports of bananas to the UK, we were exporting 120,000 tons of bananas in the 1990s. Now we're not exporting anything. Same thing with our revenue, 200 million EC dollars in 1990. Now nothing. But in that intervening period, successive governments spent over $222 million on the banana industry. So whilst the banana industry was going down that way, our nostalgia for the industry caused us to continue to pump money into an industry that was failing. We have to use evidence a lot better when we're making decisions, because if we did, then we probably would not have found ourselves in that situation. And now we're facing the reality that it's time to move on from bananas and leave the nostalgia behind. Where do we move to? Well, we're seeing good examples. For example, what's happening with the linkage between the cocoa industry, chocolate, and tourism. Kako Setlisi, Hotel Chocolat, Jade Mountain, incorporating that and causing a whole new type of tourism to develop. What Keithlin is doing with Helen's Daughters, and I can't talk about Helen's Daughters any better than Keithlin can, but what Keithlin is doing with empowering rural women is breathing fresh life into the agricultural sector. But we also have to look at eco-business. If you were to go to Whole Foods in the US, Holland & Barrett in the UK, the products you see on their shelves are products, high-value products that we produce in St. Lucia. Soursop, powerful anti-carcinogen. Turmeric and ginger, powerful anti-inflammatories. Kokom Kuli, that's being packaged and sold. Whole Foods, Holland & Barrett, GNC. Why are we not doing that? Why are they the ones maximizing benefit from products that we are growing? The nutraceutical industry right now is a $300 billion industry. In 2 years' time, it'll grow to be a $400 billion industry, but we're not tapping into it. These are all things that, those of you who know your herbal medicine, that's Gopopo, Chapotier, Guenabafay, Sime Cotois, Tabak Jab, and Veven Lachewat. I hope you're all able to identify these things, right? If not, then something wrong. But these are all things, what are we going to wait for? For Big Pharma to come down to St. Lucia and harvest them and put them on a shelf and we get nothing from it? One of the most feared animals in St. Lucia, the featherless. There was an incident that unfortunately I can't go into right now because it's a long story, but one of my forestry officers when I was PS Agriculture got bitten by a featherless in the early 2000s. And what they found was the pathology of a snake bite by the featherless is very similar to the pathology of some heart diseases. So they figured that there might be something in that snake venom that can help in treating heart disease. But that's not so far-fetched, because a relative of our feathers, the Brazilian pit viper, its venom was actually what caused the production of the very first, what is called an ACE inhibitor, which is very useful in dealing with hypertension and dealing with heart disease. So a relative of our Bothrops caribeus caused the first ACE inhibitor to be formed. And if you think that research is not taking place right now, go on the website of the Kentucky Wildlife Zoo, and you will see that the venom from our featherless, don't ask me how it got to Kentucky, but the venom from our featherless is being sold at $250 a gram, and is being experimented on, and we're getting nothing from it. So intellectual property is something that we must value, we must cherish, and see how we can patent a lot of these things that we think are useless, our biodiversity, our rich knowledge, see how we can, because there is money in it. Joanne Dujon is taking sargassum seaweed, a pest, something that is causing problems all along our East Coast, and he's converting it into a fertilizer. Why are we not helping Joanne amass all the sargassum he can, turn that into fertilizer, and sell that all across the Eastern Caribbean? That's something that we should be doing. Carlos Noel in Labrie has done a solar power desalination unit. We're in the middle of a water crisis right now. We should have upscaled this and have every single hotel in St. Lucia, every single hotel in the Eastern Caribbean using Carlos Noel's solar power desalination plant. It does not use any electricity. It is very environmentally friendly. Why is this still languishing in Labrie? These are opportunities that are there for us. We have to think differently. You know, there are opportunities in the energy sector. Electricity tariffs are very expensive right now because of the Russia-Ukraine war. This is an opportunity for us to move towards renewable energy, to increase our competitiveness. We've started with a solar panel in Latuni Vieux Fort. We need to expand that. We need to expand our use of renewable energy. There's a strong appetite for solar panels. We should have solar panels on every public building in St. Lucia. We should be encouraging people, like Mayor Motley has said, that the sun, people do not need any permission to use what God has given to them. Make it possible without any bureaucracy for people to put solar panels on their rooftops, those who can afford it. And when we are looking at impoverished communities, the same way government puts in footpaths, put in solar panels in some of these communities and tell the people in these communities that they will never have to pay for electricity again. These are opportunities to improve people's lives. Geothermal energy, let's pursue it. The wind farm in Dennery, 12 megawatts that can reduce on our dependence on fossil fuels. These are all opportunities for us if we just think differently. The creative and digital industries provide lucrative avenues for us. And we're not just talking music, we're talking architecture, advertising, performing arts, design, fashion. That is contributing over $100 billion of gross value to the UK economy. It is growing twice as fast as any other economy in the UK right now. We have an opportunity with media and technology to reach a global audience. So we're not just that little goldfish in that bowl. We can reach a global audience with media and technology. If you go right now onto Upwork, Fiverr, you can access a graphic designer, a copywriter in Serbia, in Bangladesh. I can't get anybody in St. Lucia. So right now, I can go onto Fiverr and get somebody to do a design for me for $25 US out of Bangladesh. Why are our people, our very creative people, not on Fiverr, not on Upwork? One of the problems is the banking system, because they need to have access to PayPal or foreign bank account. Let's make that possible. Let's make it possible for our creatives to market their services there so that they can make the money that they need to make. Market size and access are no longer restricting factors. Now, you know, I can't stand up here and not talk about climate change. So I'll talk a little bit about climate change very quickly. Last 8 years are the hottest ever on record since 1880. Rising sea levels are rising faster than we anticipated. Ocean temperatures are reaching all-time high. Oceans are getting more acidic because they're being forced to absorb more carbon dioxide. 230 medical journals, Dr. King can tell you, to get 230 medical journals to agree on any one thing is a miracle. They all agreed that climate crisis is the greatest threat to global public health, and the impacts are diverse and grave. However, there are opportunities for us, because for all Caribbean countries, the climate crisis is an existential threat. But the opportunity is that there's a lot of climate finance available. So our Ministry of Finance, Mr. P.S. Finance, should put a unit together and aggressively go after climate finance, because that money is there and can help us with our sustainable development efforts. So maybe that goldfish can now start leaping out of that bowl into fresh waters. But for that to happen, we have to invest heavily in our human capital. Work, learning, and citizenship in the 21st century demand that we all know how to think, to reason, to analyze, to weigh evidence, to problem solve. And That's what our education system must focus on, critical thinking and communication, not just the transmission of knowledge and facts and the regurgitation of information. And a lot of that information is becoming obsolete. If you look at the 21st century survival skills that we need now, it's critical thinking and problem solving, effective oral and written communication. Many of the jobs that are the most sought after now did not exist 15 years ago. App developer, cloud computing specialist, YouTube content creator, drone operator. 15 years ago, these jobs didn't exist. Many of the jobs that existed then are now being threatened or extinct. When last you saw a VCR or fax machine repair person, or video store employee, or record DVD shop employee? These people don't exist. In the next 10 to 15 years, artificial intelligence will replace speech translators, customer service staff, receptionists, proofreaders. All of these positions will probably become redundant as a result of artificial intelligence. These are things that we have to prepare for. But we have to understand that there must be a just transition. There must be equity. And that's where the purple economy comes in. Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. And we have to appreciate that we must give everybody an opportunity to excel in this country. And that's why early childhood development, which I'm sure Kim will speak on in a lot more detail, is important. That period between birth and 5 years is the most critical period in the development of an individual, of a human being. But where do we spend all our money? In the education sector. These are our countries. We spend all our money in primary and secondary and tertiary. Very little money in early childhood. But that's where the problems are developing. When our children are not getting that psychosocial stimulation and our parents are not getting the parental skills training, you're not getting that connectedness to school. And what does that lead to? The results have shown very clear. Children that are not connected to school as a result of not having that foundation in their early childhood years engage in more risk-taking behavior like violence, early sexual experience, alcohol, smoking, and both boys and girls. Those are facts. So, maybe Goldfish can now have a soft landing. But for that to happen, we have to focus on our young people. They are the most important resource that we have. I work with young people in the Caribbean Climate Justice Project, and I'm amazed at their creativity, their passion, their intelligence. At their age, they're much more intelligent than I was at their age. You know, that's a fact because they're exposed to so much more information. We have to involve them in everything that we do. But don't forget the elders, because there is a lot of valuable knowledge in traditional knowledge. So don't just focus on the young people, because we had floods recently and people were complaining that there was flooding in Rivière-Mita and flooding in Gros-Rivière. Why do you think they call the place Rivière-Mita, middle of the river, and Gros-Rivière, big river? Because that's where the water flowed. But we decided we're going to go and build there, not understanding that there's a reason these places got those names. Traditional knowledge, our elders, extremely important. So the solution, we cannot solve problems by using the same thinking that we used when we created the problems. The future can be bright for us, but we all have to work together and with a common purpose. And I want to end with a little bit of physics. Newton's second law of thermodynamics says that the total entropy of a system and its surroundings will never decrease. What that means is that things move towards maximum disorder. Your room, if you leave your room and you never make any effort to tidy it up, it just gets more and more disorderly. For you to make things orderly, you have to put effort. We cannot do any of these things as a society if we allow our society to just grow vai-ki-vai, if we do not put order and discipline into society. There must be order and discipline in our society. Doesn't matter how many opportunities we give to people. We cannot ignore the fact that things will just descend into chaos without order and discipline. So I want to end with my goldfish finding its way in its bowl, and I want to ask a friend of mine called Keisha to do a short summary of everything that I've just said. So if you can please cue Keisha up.
Creating a resilient and vibrant St. Lucia is possible, but it requires a change in the way we operate, at all levels. An overhaul of our education system is necessary. There must be greater focus on quality early childhood education. Our education system must develop more critical thinkers and problem solvers. There is great potential in the green, blue, creative and digital economies for us to produce high-value items that can be marketed to global audiences. Unfortunately, climate change poses an existential threat, but it also creates opportunities to mobilize green finance for sustainable development. We must harness the creativity, passion, and enthusiasm of our young people and include them in all our development efforts. However, we must stop doing the same things, the same way, and expect different results. We may be small in size, but we should not also be small in thinking. Our future can be bright, but only if we all work together.
That wasn't Keisha from Barbano, that's Keisha from Soufriere. But it just goes to show you that in maybe 5 years' time, Keisha will replace me at this podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fletcher. And no, it seems like Keisha wants to replace me. And she's doing it no. Thank you so much for that. You know, always very thought-provoking. So we heard about a rethinking of the tourism industry. Let's get more evidence-based decision-making, harvesting benefits from the traditional medicines, intellectual property, very, very critical as we begin to innovate. And of course, institutional support to our innovators. Thank you very much. These are just some of the salient points coming through. I know you are taking your own notes. Don't forget, your turn is coming up for your questions. And now we talk about the social underpinnings of our economy, healthcare, the impact of crime and violence, and implications for the labor force and the overall economy. I now call to the podium Dr. Stephen King.
Good evening, everybody, distinguished guests. It's really good to be with you. Out there in digital world, welcome. I can't be here today without recognizing the 40th anniversary of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, that institution that has served us so well. I want to thank all who contributed to that Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and where it is today. And I can't say that without recognizing our deceased Sir Dwight Venner, son of our soil, who has parted, but he was a stalwart and he was a pillar of that bank. So if we can go to my presentation. When Everton called me to do this topic, I said, oh my God, what are we going to talk about here? But to me, I had to break this down. And what this means to me is really human development. That's what we are talking about. And you know, the father of developmental economics is a St. Lucian, Sir Arthur Lewis. Actually, his parents came from Antigua. Shows how our Caribbean region and OECS is all connected. But we claim him. And he said this: public health is as important to economic development as economic development is to public health. Now, he was talking here about malnutrition and chronic debilitating diseases and things like bilharzia and how it impacted the productivity of the labor force. However, his statement is still valid. Here is public health. What exactly is public health? Public health is a science and art of preventing disease and prolonging life. It's an organized system of effort. It calls for informed choices of government, communities, businesses, NGOs, individuals. And their organized, synergized efforts produce public health. There's another thing about public health. I said informed choices. And I think Dr. Fletcher was talking about that. Thinking. But informed choices also, we have what we call the public health approach. And what the public health approach is, you identify a problem, you analyze the problem, you get evidence on that problem, you search for the best solutions to your problem. You put that into a tailored plan, so you use your innate indigenous knowledge and you create a plan that you believe will solve your problem. You implement it, you monitor and you evaluate and you change that plan. That's called the public health approach. And this, I decided to look at human development through the lens of homicide. And I make no apology that I'm a pathologist and therefore homicide is something that's very close to me. But guys, you think, yeah, thank you very much. If you look at homicides from 1990s to 2020, that's what this slide does, you will see that our homicide rate per 100,000 has gone from 10 or just under 10 to 28.2 per 100,000 population in 2020. And if I was to put 21, 22, and this year on that, we are now at 40 per 100,000. We have an epidemic of murder, okay? This is a crisis. Public health crisis, social crisis, and economic crisis. Now, the Human Development Report 2012, done by the UN, UNDP, and St. Lucia is in here. You may not see it on this particular graph, but St. Lucia is one of the 7 countries analyzed in this report. And you see here, what this slide shows is that as inequality rises, so does your murder rate. Inequality this is income inequality now, which is usually defined by the Gini coefficient. Now, if your Gini coefficient is above 40, you're in trouble. You should really be under 20 if you had an equal society. St. Lucia, today, this is a St. Lucian trajectory for the Gini coefficient. If you look at it, it started off in 1995, 42.6 was our Gini coefficient. It was bad, but not critical. We've gone up to 51.2. I would like to propose to you that one of the reasons that our homicide rate is climbing as it is because our inequality is climbing. And a society, income inequality is a surrogate marker for inequality across the board. Access to justice, access to education, access to finance, access to business support, access to social mobility, access to networks. And this is what is driving frustration and antisocial behavior. Now, the same UNDP report also made a second identification of a major factor in murder rates, and that was the amount of time you spent in education. The longer somebody stays in education, the less likely they are to be violent. Interesting. But in a population that is so. But you have to ask yourself a question. Are our youth as committed to education as they once were? Is our government as committed to education as it once was? I suspect not. I don't have empirical data on that, but I have community stories and traveling in community, and I see youth in community, and I speak to them, I see them in the schools. And the lack of commitment, why is that? One of the reasons for that, I think, is that our schools don't attract and support the youth, okay? You need trauma-sensitive education because our youth are coming in with multiple traumas, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Also, these youth need to have safe spaces where they can, with people they trust, so they can explore, they can explore these traumas and come up with healthy coping. That is one of the purposes of education, to get somebody in a place where they now have a platform for a successful trajectory in life. You're not going to get there if you are carrying all that baggage. It interferes with your learning and your decision making. So, for instance, why isn't our education curriculum being reformed in a very aggressive or assertive manner? Why are the creative arts not there so our youth can express themselves? Because that's a place where you can express. Why is sport not mainstreamed? So that they can again express themselves and actualize in sport? Because sport teaches lots. Yes, the academic curriculum is important and it remains. Where's the technical? Where's the vocational? Where is the curriculum that says every child will be successful in this school? No child will go through this school and not come out to be somebody who can have a productive life with a good trajectory. Where's the student governance now, where they learn how to govern? So, education is a key factor in addressing our problems. One, yes, homicides, but I think Dr. Fletcher pointed to the real purpose of education in livelihoods as well. So I want to talk a little bit about this pyramid, which is really a complex trauma pyramid. I just want to walk you through it a little bit. At the bottom, there's a the generational embodiment, historical trauma. We are a region that has been severely oppressed and traumatized. Now, the genes in our body are no longer seen as unaffected by the environment. That theory has, or that scientific approach has gone. We now know that our environment directly impacts our gene functions. And our genes directly affect our development. So all of the epigenetic mechanisms, in other words, the trauma of our ancestors passes on down the line because human beings are perfectly designed to adapt to their environments. You expose them to a toxic environment, they will adapt. And they will actually cause gene expression to change in that adaptation to become better able to survive toxicity, but they can pass that on. The other thing they pass on, of course, is mimetics, which is the knowledge. So, in fact, this brings me, you know, where they say the sins of the father. This is the science of the sins of the father. And, you know, the mimetics, the one I hear the most, because I'm an advocate to remove all violence, especially violence against children. So corporal punishment was something that clearly I had to fight to get rid of, to the best of my ability. But you will hear the mimetic, spare the rod and spoil the child. You can't let a child grow up without the punishment. They'll be indisciplined, etc., etc. And I'm sure we can talk about that later. But moving on, social conditions and the local context. The ecological environment that you grow in, any organism, that ecological environment determines the growth. The ecological theory of behavior, your individual, your relationships, your community, and your society will all impact on your behavior. A toxic environment, which includes lots of traumatic experiences, including adverse childhood experiences, causes disrupted neurodevelopment. That means it alters your brain. It alters the brain, how it thinks, how it functions, but it even goes further and can anatomically change that brain. But what you now have is somebody coming from a toxic environment, and they have the decision-making that works in that environment. Take them into another environment, doesn't work. So, what do you find? You have substance use. As people are trying to cope, they make decisions to use substances. They make decisions to be more violent. They make decisions such that they are poor parents. They make bad life choices. And these bad life choices are going to change the trajectory of their lives and make them less able to be successful. Also, in case you may think that it is just something, behavior like, you know, you and I talking, the cellular level, toxic environments create chronic stress and will affect your cellular function. Your very cells will be affected. And you'll see this thing manifesting with hyperinflammation in the bodies. You'll see it manifesting with a disrupted immune system, a dysregulated immune system. You'll see it in disordered metabolism. And what do you then see? Diabetes, hypertension, cancer, cardiovascular disease. Ask yourself a question. Why are all those diseases so high in our populations in this region and in this country? The answer, at least a significant part of it, is here. So what's happening? Our people are dying early, and they're living long years of disability. Mental, physical, and social disability. Because that is the definition of health, by the way, your mental, physical, and social wellness. But this trauma, it underpins those dysfunctions. Just going to share, so this is a little sideline now, the economic impact of disease. You know, so just a few little examples, just for the economists here who feel that, you know, we need to know how much money and how much should we invest in health. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic is estimated to have cost almost $4 trillion in terms of loss. In terms of the loss of the GDP. Adverse childhood experience and toxic stress in the United States, a nice study published in Child Abuse and Neglect, says that $2 trillion per annum are lost through adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. Chronic non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension, etc. Study by David Bloom and them in a Pan-American publication. 18 times the total health expenditure of Jamaica. And mental health, often that orphan of the health system, the last one we think about, but so crucial. $1 spent to deal with anxiety and depression is a $4 return. I was telling Dr. Gardner, I'm anxious right now. So, I could do that dollar investment. But moving along, what can we do? Because we can do so much. So let's start thinking about what we can do. Fair society, healthy lives, social determinants of health. Sir Michael Marmot has been a champion of this, Englishman. This particular paper is a British report, but he was also one of the chief architects of the WHO social determinants. And really what we're talking about here, these are the 6 policies we're talking about. Give every child the best start. Universal antenatal care, supporting our women how they get pregnant and when they get pregnant. Universal childhood education, in-house and institutional, in preschools, etc. Youth skills, education reform. Give our youth, enable youth to maximize skills and life control. Have community safe spaces for our youth to recreate and congregate. I love the 40 assets approach, the Search Institute 40 assets approach to building resilience. Moving on, healthy standard of fair employment and good work. Nice to see ministers and your excellency here. The living wage. Have a living wage so our people have fair employment and good work. Better access to entrepreneurship, capital, and so on. Universal food, clothing, and shelter security. Better community infrastructure. Good recreational spaces. Ongoing lifelong access in communities. And my favorite, universal health care. Major strategy to deal with inequality. I see Zai Stedman here. And she and I work long hours, not only health sector reform, but on the strategic plan for health. And that's what this really is. Universal health care is part of the overall strategic plan that we proposed. What it speaks of is a completely integrated system of healthcare, public and private, and primary, secondary, and tertiary providers. Everybody, because we're too small to leave everybody out, we need to synergize everybody. In addition to that, multidisciplinary, because you cannot deal with the complex health problems of today as a single practitioner or a single nurse. You need multiple disciplines there. Indeed, as you know, you need your teachers, you need your police, you need your fire, you need your counselors, you need your very residents, and that patient-centered and public engagement in governments. We need to understand, bring our people. As I still remember, we spoke about having health teams in communities, health teams in regions, health teams in institutions that bring the people into the design and the governance of the health systems. A health plan for canneries is not the same as a health plan for castries. But they will achieve the same objectives, which is healthy people. And of course, as most people say, well, it's all about financing, right? Universal healthcare is not just about financing. It's an entire system, equitable system, efficient, effective, and equitable. But of course, financing is crucial. And that has to be, we have to do this. And we have time. Do you know St. Lucia only spends 4.3% of its GDP on health, as compared to some of our other sister countries? We underspend, we underinvest. Time to change. This is what I call my wealth wheel. Jimmy spoke about it, human capital. So all the assets that you have as an individual to be resilient, to be innovative and creative, which comes from a community and an education system that has supported you and a family that has supported you. Social capital, all that we can, all out the sum total of our relationships together, healthy relationship, and Jimmy had it at his point, joining together. All those institutions that build social cohesion, and that includes our recreational as well as our strategic social cohesion building institutions. Knowledge capital, that's sum total of the knowledge we acquire and the knowledge we create. And then, of course, the ability to critically think and creatively think, to use that knowledge for action and innovation. And that, of course, should create development, progressive development, where quality of life improves and our environment does not get degraded. And wealth. And wealth is not just what you have in the bank. Wealth is your social wealth. That's your relationships. Your physical wealth, that's your health. It speaks to your all aspects, a holistic approach to wealth. And my last slide is Sir George Arlene, who makes the point that human development is what this is all about, and it's a process, and that we as healthcare workers must engage. Now, right now we have an epidemic of violence, like I indicated, and there's a very clear public health approach to dealing with violence. It's called violence interruption. If you go to thecureviolence.org, you'll see how it's done. And what you need is, and I would love to see our Ministry of Health declare that violence is a public health emergency, and that we must now come to the table with the holistic solutions, which include violence interruption, pushing back against inequality, education reform, in addition to our law enforcement, which must be firm and fair and respectful of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. King. Always, we can count on him to be passionate, to deliver, unafraid, the messages that need to come through. And certainly, given the events of the past few months here in St. Lucia, the issue of crime is definitely at the forefront of all of our minds. Even in our sister territories as well, the Caribbean is definitely facing this epidemic of murder, as Dr. King has well put it. He's spoken about inequality being a key factor driving that. Schools, how do we reform our schools, upgrade our schools to attract our youth, equip them with safe spaces in order to be able to deal with some of the traumas our children are going through, aggressive reform of the education system, and using sports to be able to take home the message. And so we want to delve deeper into the education sector. We'll be calling on Dr. Kim Gardner-Sadhu, who is going to explore the role of the education sector in the economy, looking at the issues of equitable access to opportunities, in particular for non-neurotypical and children with disabilities. We invite Dr. Gardner-Sadhu.
Thank you, Lisa. And I would wish to adopt the protocol already established. And I would like to thank Mr. Seeley for having me. When he first called, I too, like Dr. King, stopped him and said, I think you have the wrong person on the phone, because I clearly can't help you with banking or finance. But once he went on to explain, I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about. So I took some creative license with the topic that I was given, but I think the answers will unfold. So we can start. So I'm going to tell you a story, a bit about the trajectory of a St. Lucian childhood, and try and weave through this story some of the statistics and end up with some of the solutions. But my former presenters have already touched on many of the things that will be in my presentation. So this is Jonathan. Jonathan is a 23-year-old, unemployed, frequently in trouble with the law, has been incarcerated a couple of times, uses marijuana daily. What was Jonathan's childhood like? He was unable to go to preschool. His mother could not afford. He entered infant school at the age of 5. He already had a lag in his K readiness skills once he started school because he didn't have preschool. He needed special ed support and essentially had an acquired disability throughout his infant and primary school career. He did, thankfully, to universal secondary education, get into secondary school, but he didn't have what he needed in there. So he dropped out at 15 years in Form 3. In terms of his home life, he had intermittent food security, he had physical and psychological abuse with family members, witnessing domestic violence between his parents. He had an absentee father who was also frequently in jail, and he now has a 1-year-old that he's unemployed, can't support, and the cycle continues. So is Jonathan an outlier? Jonathan is not one specific person I'm talking about, but an amalgamation of many. The data says otherwise. If we look at our net enrollment rates, an average of 44%, this is data from the Educational Statistical Digest of 2020 and a UNESCO study in 2015. 0 to 2 years, only 22% are enrolled in early childhood. As we get older, 3 to 4 and 5 years, we have a higher enrollment. But early on, there is not much, which is not unexpected because we don't usually send babies to preschool. But we have a better enrollment rate at primary school, 96%, and 84% in secondary school. So we can see we lose some children there. 74% of our dropouts are males, 148 in 2020, and 87% of those dropouts happened in Form 3 and Form 5. Let's look at our minimum standard scores from that year as well, 2019, 2020. Starting in grade 2, this is the percent of children above the minimum standard. 35% of our boys are above the minimum standard in grade 2 math, and 53% above the minimum standard in grade 2 English. So, and then you can see the girls in the orange, 40% and 70%. And by the time we get to grade 4, 22% of our boys alone are scoring above the minimum standard. And in math and in English, 35% are scoring above the minimum standard. So we can see we are definitely not thriving in our basic literacy and numeracy. Other stats, a multiple indicator cluster survey done in 2012 by UNICEF, which is great nationally representative data. 8.6% of our children 0 to 5 are not developmentally on track. 25% of our children are overweight or obese, a study done by myself and other colleagues, and 5% are undernourished, so malnutrition, both over and under, about 30% of our children. I'm sure it's more now. Violent methods of discipline, 67.5% of our children, 2 to 14, had received violent discipline in the preceding 6 months. That's again from the mixed study. And then a value called the child well-being status, which is a measure of health, nutrition, education, and child protection. 34% of our children had low child well-being status. So I hope I'm painting a picture that Jonathan really isn't an outlier, but actually quite common. So we've already kind of gone through this with Dr. King and Dr. Fletcher, but we are born wired for feelings and ready to learn, and it's the experiences that we have. The science of early childhood development tells us that what we experience in the first few years of life are really significant in shaping us, who we are and who we become as adults. And what the experiences are, good or bad, really does affect who we become. So what's the evidence for this? We've already had a physics lesson. Let's have a biology lesson today. So the brain is the most rapidly growing organ of the body. By the time you are 2 to 3 years old, 2/3 of your adult brain size has already been achieved. And brain growth continues through 18 years, but much more slowly than in the first 2 to 3 years of life. Oops. Again, biology lesson. This is a neuron. This is a cell in your brain. This is a very zoomed in picture of it. And when you're first born, your neurons are there for breathing and feeding and sleeping and pooping. That's what you do when you're born. And then as experiences, as we said, in the environment exposes you to different experiences, then you start to make connections. Every time you have an experience, a connection is made. So your mom smiles at you, a connection is made. She smiles at you again, that connection is strengthened. So over time, there's a complicated network of experiences that happen, good or bad. Again, when you have a negative experience, a negative connection is made. But these neurons are connecting and connecting every time a child has any experience. So, and again, with repeated experiences, those are strengthened. Experiences, pathways that are not used are pruned or lost. I like to use the analogy of it's why we're wiring a house and we're laying down the networks in that house. And this is also represented here. You can see by the time you're 9 months or 2 years, that's a lot of connections that have been made. And some you can see are getting thicker. And then as an adult, you can see we've lost some somewhere. That's some of the things we don't use, we lose. We really do lose the connections. And again, this is delving deeper into the point of when are the critical sensitive periods in early development? Let's look at the slide with the blue background. Look at 0 to 3 years. The sensitive periods all peak before 3 years. This is the most critical time for brain development. It's not that brain development doesn't happen after, but when is the most sensitive period in the brain? It is before 3 years and definitely before 5 years. And during that time, we're making connections for numbers, pair social skills, emotional control, habitual ways of responding, language development, all those things are happening early on. And Dr. King talked about this a bit. When we don't make those connections and those experiences don't happen, we literally, physically don't grow brain. So in the black background slide, extreme neglect, that child has a small head, small brain, because there was extreme neglect and literally didn't make any connections. And then on the blue slide, that's an MRI. It's a functional MRI. So the red means activity and it's lighting up and there's a lot going on. And if we look at the slide on the right, in the 2 circles, that's the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is the area for emotional control, regulation, connectivity. That's what the temporal lobe is about. And you can see there's not much action happening in that temporal lobe. It's pretty black. So that's someone who has very little empathy, cannot connect with others. That's the MRI of someone who can shoot a sleeping 2-year-old in the middle of the night. So what are we saying? So Dr. King touched on the adverse childhood experiences. What did Jonathan experience? There's studies done linking 10 things that happen before the age of 18 to outcomes as an adult. And these can be broken down into categories of abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And you can see what they represent there. The higher your score is, the higher your ACE score, then the worse your outcomes are. And we can see, I just pulled some of them, but as your ACE score increases, substance abuse, chronic disease, COPD, coronary artery disease, all the things that we've learned before. But added to our adverse childhood experiences are now adverse community environments, which is what we're facing as well, also increasing our ACE scores. Now, our economics lesson, one more lesson. This is called the Heckman equation. So it's an equation done by James Heckman, who's a Nobel Prize winner in economics as well for his work done on early childhood development. And he showed the impact through some studies where the study provided high quality early childhood programming, not just education, but all around programming in the homes, in the communities. And then he studied the population after that. And he saw that the highest rate of return, as you can see, was prenatally and early childhood. And I can do better than Dr. King's 1 in 4. For every dollar invested in early childhood, there's a $16 return, is the latest data. So we're obviously investing high in that, right? Well, no. So when the brain is the most malleable is when we invest the least. And this can represent most countries globally, not just St. Lucia. And what are we doing in St. Lucia? This is pulled from a budget analysis for investments in children in 2015 on UNICEF. We spend 1.2% of our education budget on ECD and 70% on the higher ones. And Dr. Fletcher showed the rest of the OECS is quite similar in its spending. So let's get back to Jonathan. Did we provide the things that he needed, the resilience builders? Did we provide his caregivers with the support that he needed to promote his development? How many things were a threat to him? Did we help his family? Did we help them with the social issues that caused them to be stressed? Did we ensure that he was enrolled in a high-quality ECD center, early childhood center, and give his mom the parenting support she needed early on? And did we identify early on his delays that I'm sure existed because of neglect and because of his lack of entry into preschool? So to summarize, the early years are important. The most sensitive period for brain development is under 3 years. Every experience that you happen impacts brain development, good or bad. And we need to invest in ECD because they have the highest rates of return. But now for our call for action, what are we supposed to do? Every single one of us has to sit and think, how am I supporting early childhood development? How am I supporting our most vulnerable and our earliest children? We have to use a child-centered approach, and this is for all children, particularly our children with disabilities, with delays, our neuroatypical children, and our children with acquired disabilities because of environmental issues. And we have to use a community as the scaffolding, and we have to support their parents. It has to be multidisciplinary, all of us involved, and as we've said, it has to be transformational in its thinking, because what we've been doing is not working. And we all have to feel invested in this. Nelson Mandela said, our children are the rock on which our future will be built, and our greatest asset as a nation, and they will be the leaders of our country, the creators of our national wealth, and those who will care for and protect our people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim Gardner-Sadoo. Since you have this very calming voice in delivering all of this very bad news, please deliver bad news to me any day. Because the picture that she painted for us, we're really not doing good at all at the base of it. And for some strange reason, this came to mind throughout your presentation. The early bird catches the worm. I don't know why, but if we start very early, everything that Dr. Gardner-Sadoo has said really tells us that we will be well on our way to achieving all of the things that we see for a better and brighter future for ourselves. So hopefully, Minister here in the audience, yes, we're talking about evidence-based decision-making, and I see that the Minister has been listening quite intently. I'm sure a little later on in the open session, he'll be sharing some thoughts with us. We now want to welcome Ms. Kathleen Carew to the podium, and she is going to delve into increasing the participation in agriculture and exploring the role of women in our society and the overall economy.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Protocol already being established. I would like to first congratulate the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank for achieving such a huge milestone of 40 years, and here's to 40 more, I might add. Also, I would like to commend the leadership of Governor Antoine as well, along with, of course, our local counterparts, Mr. Everton Seeley, and the team for facilitating today's lecture. So thank you. Now, at first, when I received the call, I was really honored. I was excited to be a part of the lecture series until I saw that every single person on the panel was a doctor, except myself. So, way to set a standard. I see also that they tried to add MBE to the end of my name, but I don't think that matches up too much. My co-panelists can also tell you that I got so nervous after the dry run today that I ran and revised my entire presentation as well. So please bear with me. On a serious note, though, I want to thank the ECCB for the inclusion of someone like myself in this panel, a young person traversing a very lonely road of social entrepreneurship and seeing the need to hear from my perspective. As I said, I don't think I'm as illustrious as the other speakers here, but I was introduced as someone who runs a nonprofit organization called Helen's Daughters. Let's cue the slide. Perfect. Thank you. So yes, I do run a nonprofit organization called Helen's Daughters, an organization that focuses on supporting women in agriculture, particularly from rural communities like I am from. Usually people describe us as, a little women's group, always with the diminutives, or a little group with girls in agriculture. But I look at HD as a small organization with potentially huge impact. Now, I was tasked with speaking on increasing the participation in agriculture and exploring the role of women in our society and economy, but I find it's a far overarching topic, so I've narrowed it a bit because I think we've gotten quite a good sense from our other speakers tonight. So I've narrowed it a bit to speak on women in agriculture, in our society, and the informal economy. Now, I'll go into the explanation of the informal economy a bit later, but there is one quote that has always stuck with me. There is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. And I've found in St. Lucia that we talk a lot about boosting up agriculture and youth in agriculture and so forth, but we don't act on it. So tonight, I just wanted to do somewhat of a social experiment, no pressure. I wanted to ask, and please be truthful. Raise your hand, how many people have encouraged a family member or their child into the agricultural sector in the last 10 years? Be truthful. Okay, so as we can see, not even close to the majority or even half of the participants here. And that is really the attitude of what's going on currently in St. Lucia. We talk the talk, boy, we have the radio shows, we have the TV programs, we have every single expert on what should be done in the agricultural sector, but at the same time, we ourselves are also not pushing our family, our friends, our children into the sector, and I can understand why. I myself, from Fwaso Babonneau, was never pushed into agriculture, but I'll go into that journey at a later segment. So, in 2015, Forbes published an article on countries with the most women in management positions. St. Lucia placed number 3 globally. So, I remember this very clearly. I remember the talk shows and so forth. Oh, gender equality has been achieved in St. Lucia, and you know, we don't have issues, blah, 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 and so forth. Now, while many people have obviously looked at this Forbes article as justification that we're good on the gender equality side, seriously though, who do these statistics include? This data, this research, is essentially, in my opinion, one of the problems of our society, because there are 2 societies. And in agriculture, there are 2 sectors, the formal and the informal, and the formal is the one that's counted. Women, yes, outperform men in education for a myriad of reasons. And also, yes, women in formal sectors are more likely to be managers. But then answer this. Why are women more unemployed than men? So I found this research on the informal sector. And interestingly enough, the Caribbean region, well, Latin America and the Caribbean, placed 3rd after South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa as having the most women in the informal sector. So we number 3 with the most women managers, and we're also number 3 with the most women in the informal sector. Make it make sense. It is estimated that the informal sector contributes 8% to GDP. The size of the informal, which I think actually is probably more, the size of the informal sector in terms of employment is 27%. And these persons are not counted in our statistics. They are left out of our social safety nets and a myriad of other issues. Although agriculture and rural development still account for a significant percentage of exports and employment in rural areas, and a significant number of women are involved in subsistence farming, I find that we turn up our nose on small-scale farming. I find that we need to be reminded that more small farms feed more of the world's population, and yet in this country, we go past the Castries market every day and we undervalue the contribution of women who actively participate in this sector and who receive little to no support. So in 2021, we were tasked with, by an agency with doing a 5-country study in the Caribbean, tackling the problem of why women and youth have issues in actually accessing the agricultural sector, for example. Can you please put it up? Because I'm also, thank you. So these countries were St. Lucia, Dominica, Jamaica, Suriname, and Guyana. And obviously we did a root cause analysis, and yes, there was a lot of similarities between the 5 countries. But one of the things I found that you constantly hear is that women are not interested in agriculture. And from our research, what I found was it's not that women are not interested in agriculture, it's that they don't, and youth as well, is that they don't have the support to actually enter or succeed in the agricultural sector. So you can see a myriad of the root causes, from limited inclusion of agriculture in the school curriculum. I am an example of this. I went to all-girls schools, I'll not mention. I'm a proud alumna though. However, in my secondary school, the male school had agriculture and IT, and we had food and nutrition and sewing. Go figure. I was from infant, primary, preschool, secondary, and so forth, never taught an agricultural class. So how am I expected to go into a sector when I have no clue about it? And on top of that, I'm surrounded by nightmare stories on top of my family saying, don't you dare go into it. Traditional gender norms. I know we deal with this every single day. Oh, why Helen's daughters? Why women in agriculture and so forth? But sometimes we have unspoken gender norms, not just in the agricultural sector, that go unnoticed or unreported. An example would be one of our members who has everything prepped to get her loan and so forth, and the first comment from the loans officer is, why a nice girl like you going into agriculture? Lack of access to training for women in the agricultural sector. I'm proud to say that Helen's Daughters does run free training programs for women, not only in St. Lucia, but in St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I noticed a gap in the system. Many of the agricultural trainings were very specialized, which meant that it was tailored to persons who already had prior knowledge in the sector. Also, a number of the trainings were in the middle of the week at 2 or 3 p.m. What woman who's probably holding down, or even man who's probably holding down a full-time job or managing their farm or has to take care of someone has a time to go to an agricultural course during that time? So we bypassed and we created something that was more accessible and also free. The informal status of women farmers. Another very proud goal that we achieved was that now our training program, well, since 2021 in the pandemic, with the partnership of the Ministry of Agriculture, has been used as a substitute for their Good Agricultural Practices program, enabling women who were perhaps in the sector for 30, 40 years to now finally get to the process of getting their registered farmer's card. And you may not realize the importance of something like this, but aside from moving a woman from the informal to the formal sector, we are also giving her access to concessions, to other benefits, and mainly support from the Ministry of Agriculture. And finally, that she can be counted. Limited access to land for women and youth. I know that, again, we don't think that we have gender equality issues in St. Lucia, but research shows that 30% of women own land versus 70% of men. And there is no gender mainstream land tenure act within St. Lucia, or at least in my opinion, no policies underway to try to gender mainstream land tenureship. Limited access to finance for women and youth. I think we all know about our financial sector. It is risk averse and it is collateral based. For a woman, as I mentioned, that doesn't have land, perhaps, who has been renting for her entire life and has nothing essentially to her name, but she has an amazing farm or project or whatever, but perhaps maybe just not the collateral, she would not get the loan. And it's time, I will go into that, but it's time to really look outside of the box and outside of our commercial banks as well. Women taking on a larger share of unpaid labor. Unpaid care work is unspoken about in St. Lucia. A number of our members, of our women, they have sacrificed lives, jobs, whatever it is. Perhaps when there is a family emergency, there's an elderly who needs to be taken care of, a child who's gotten sick, and usually women take on this. So the effects, women and youth are at the base of the value chain. Youth lack interest in agriculture, and higher incidence actually of gender-based violence in rural communities. So I think I went through quite a bit of the gender norms. So in our research, can you pull up the slide again? Thanks. In our research, we noted three major things: access to finance, technical training, and land. The first, access to finance. Our banks. We all know the obstacles, and while there may be a number of financial reforms going on, we do have to ask ourselves, are we meeting the needs of the most marginalized in the community, in our communities? Are we meeting the needs of persons who perhaps cannot read and write? Are we meeting the needs of persons who are financially illiterate? Because even in our school curriculums, financial literacy is not taught. In our training program, it is though. And land is another huge issue. While there are many opportunities from Crown Lands and so forth, as an organization, I can tell you, just obtaining a lease from Crown Lands, it took us 2 years. And if the nightmare we had to go through for 2 years, as one of our farmers mentioned, if you're going through this as an organization, far less for me as an individual. And finally, technical training and also access with inputs and markets. Technical training, as I said, we introduced the Women's Farmers Academy in SVG and SKN, and here it's the Rural Women's Ag Academy. And we provide a number of trainings from sustainable agriculture, climate resilience, financial literacy, nutritional marketing, because we do also have to ensure that our producers understand the nutritional content of what they're selling to their consumers. I think one of our co-panelists mentioned that the health and wellness industry is $1 billion industry. Let's take advantage of it. Can you put up the slide, please? Thank you. So with this research being done, essentially what we did after we did the 5-country study and so forth, we took it on, in a sense, as a framework to create the interventions that we needed, not only in St. Lucia, but across the Caribbean. Curriculum. One of the things I remembered in our membership is that, again, when she wanted to go to study agriculture, her parents, her family encouraged her into going into nursing instead. And this is not an isolated topic. So we created a scholarship program with the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College that provides fully funded scholarships for 2 women who are studying agri-entrepreneurship and crop science. The same is also being deployed this year with the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Technical College. So what we're trying to do is create, in a sense, an enabling environment where access to finance doesn't limit you from actually studying agriculture. The Water Tank Initiative. Last year, I think for climate change in St. Lucia, it took us for a loop. Dr. Fletcher talked about, obviously, the November troughs, but running an NGO and running on mostly restricted funding, it was quite difficult. I remember speaking about the Water Tank Initiative and why it was so essential. Most persons were like, well, why would you spend money on just giving women water tanks and so forth? But the difference is that, for example, in our membership, there was a case that one of our members had to go to a remote area to farm because of the 2-week drought that we experienced. I think it was in June, July, I can't remember. And what happened? An unreported rape because she had to shift. Also, the difference between somebody who's outside of the agricultural sector going through a drought means that, oh, I don't have water to wash my clothes or to cook. For a woman in someone in agriculture, it means literally months of going without an income. The agri-entrepreneurship program, which I'll go into more, I've always looked at agriculture and tourism supporting one another and not competing with one another. Dr. King, I'm sure a few years ago, did your residency. And the agri-apprenticeship program is essentially a residency for us, because what we've noticed is that persons are trained in agriculture and the only opportunities that exist are at the Ministry of Agriculture, or they go off and try to be agricultural entrepreneurs. We partnered with Hotel Chocolat, who seems to have similar values to ourselves, and we created what we tried to design, a climate resilient farm. One, to introduce not just our young ladies, 4 of whom are womaning the farm, 2 of which are scholarship holders, presenting them with different types and modern mechanizations of agriculture, and also using it as a training site for our members, and finally exposing other persons. It's not just guests, it's actually locals that are curious about learning where their food comes from and different growing methods and so forth. The In the Eyes of a Farmer Agritourism Tour. It's a long, very long name, but essentially, again, I think that agritourism has been a sector that we have really overlooked. At Helen's Daughters, a number of our farmers noticed, that, hey, there's an opportunity there, but again, 2 obstacles: 1, startup capital, and 2, insurance. What did we do? We created an overall agritourism network. We started with about 5 women, and we provided startup capital, whether it was to create pathways, whether it was to provide water tanks or put bathrooms on site so that they could have their farms ready to be agritourism tours. We now have a partnership with Cox & Company with these women. And also the main thing, we provide overall tour insurance as well for our women who are part of the agritourism network. I can go on and on about our programs and so forth, but I know we're tight for time. But again, something that I think St. Lucia really needs to look into is the fusion between agriculture and tourism. Tourists now want to travel for the taste of the place in order to get a sense of the place. And we have seen that firsthand in our partnership, not only with Hotel Chocolat, but our farmers markets, and this is a shameless plug, but it's the last Saturday of every month. I hope to see you at the next one. But truly, the 2 sectors can support one another. And the products that come out of some of these interventions, for example, at our farmers market, our people are truly talented. You can get breadfruit waffles, you can get kombucha, you can get sauerkrauts. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I just wanted to touch more on the agri-apprenticeship program with Hotel Chocolat. It's the first all-female apprenticeship program on island that doubles as a training space for our members. Hotel Chocolat is a direct buyer of the produce grown on property, and the farm, Hotel Chocolat, actually matched the cost with us to build out the farm and so forth. Oops, before I go to the video, I just wanted to say something. There's been many interventions that I've mentioned and so forth, and it's kind of sad to say, but all of our interventions are funded by foreign donors. I know Dr. King and Dr. Fletcher have mentioned, but I find as a social entrepreneur that there sometimes can be a lack of a supportive network within St. Lucia, especially for developing NGOs or civil society organizations and so forth. And thankfully to mentors like the 2 that I've mentioned, the journey doesn't feel as isolated. I wanted to really end the presentation with this idea of how to power modern St. Lucia. And with Helen's Daughters, we start every year with a co-creation retreat. We draft our program of work with our members, and it is our belief that obviously we're not telling them what to do. We're also listening to their needs, their wants, their desires, and co-creating solutions alongside the direct beneficiaries. And I believe that's exactly what St. Lucia needs to do. For powering a modern St. Lucia, it needs to be a social partnership between civil society, government, and the private sector. And we can cue the video. If you want an idea of how to create the co-partnership, well,
I can be your woman. Let me be your woman. I can be your woman.
Here we are. It's a wrap of the Women's Retreat, the Helen's Daughters Farmers Retreat for today. And I got here late, but what a remarkable, remarkable day. In such beautiful ambience, in such amazing presence of some wonderful women. What Helen's Daughters is doing, like I always say, you can't put this in the form of, you can't put a price tag on this. This is remarkable stuff. And just being here today is evident of the beautiful community that's been created. I don't say that's farmers. That's not farmers. That's not a group of farmers. You get me? There's a community that is built here. And when you get to spend time in retreats and seminars and occasions like that with these ladies, where you get to feel their energy in different forms, to hear their ideas, you know, you can get to relate and relate to them. This is a beautiful platform. I am so honored to, in whatever way that I am involved, I am so honored to be involved with this movement. This community is amazing, and I cannot wait for the day when this becomes the community that is going to be widespread throughout the entire Caribbean. And Helen's Daughter, when you hear that name, it's just going to be home. You're going to get that feeling, you know, that feeling of purpose. That is what I can't wait for the rest of the world, the rest of the Caribbean, to grasp on to this movement right here. This made my day. This is my entire day made.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Keithling Carew. And she was worried about not, being in the doctor category, right? But as I did tell you earlier on, for being so attentive throughout the evening. I can see smiles because people are quite eager to get their contributions out. Don't forget, those of you who are at home and further afield, virtually, you can always post your questions, comments, and I'll be happy to pose it to the panel. Now, here in-house, we have and particularly women in agriculture. And I'm wondering this, for some time now, we've had a Youth in Agriculture program here running within the Ministry of Agriculture. What more do you think can be done to grab that interest? There have been a few studies done, particularly with women, and while there seem not to be any barriers preventing women from getting into fields that are traditionally not seen for women, especially in STEMs, the women tend not to want to choose to go into those fields. So it's not so much that they are being barred or the hurdles. How do you think we can begin
Perfect. I think, as I mentioned, the choice is hardly a choice when you're not exposed in schools. We'd love to work with the Ministry of Education to include agriculture in school curriculum. We'd be very open to that. But once again, how can you make a choice when you've never been exposed? And I think the other factor has been that for a long time, outside of obviously the banana corporations and so forth and other cooperatives, really in recent times, a lot of the interventions have been led by agencies, not led from the ground up. And I think there's a lack of grassroots movements and also support of grassroots organizations. I can tell you, for example, with Helen's Daughters, that for quite some time, what we were running into is getting programmatic funding only. And programmatic funding projects have a start and an end date. My concern is sustainability. A consultant can come in today and leave tomorrow, but I'm St. Lucia and I stay in here. And I want that solution to last way past me and way past my children. So I think these are really the three areas that we need to focus on. But really, I think St. Lucian women, it's not that there isn't an interest, because after the pandemic, I can tell you, when we had our training program before the pandemic, it was 30 to 40. During the pandemic, it was 297 persons who applied. So agriculture, it may be an afterthought, but there's still an interest there.
Do we reform our tourism sector to be environmentally friendly? And as Keithlin herself indicated in her presentation, being able to further integrate the two. You know, we are built on the sun, sea, and sand. We've had some inroads in being able to bring in the
I don't think it's one at the exclusion of the other. There will always be tourists, there will always be visitors who come to your country because they want the sun, sea, and sand experience. That's why they come to the Caribbean. That's what they see the Caribbean as being synonymous with. And you have to cater to that group of tourists. I think what is happening is that the tastes of the tourists are becoming a lot more sophisticated, a lot more nuanced. So some of them are not just coming for the sun, sea, and sand experience. And as the age range changes, you know, you have people, you have the younger tourists who want a different experience. They want to immerse themselves more in the culture of the country. They want to see what the country is all about. They want to be part of an experience. Blogging for them on Instagram or wherever else is not just saying, oh, look at me, I'm at Redwood Beach, but, you know, look at me, I'm having a bouillon. You know what a bouillon is? I mean, so you have to cater to that. I think we have to make our industry a lot more diverse so that it caters to a wider range of people. But the most important thing in all of this is that we have to ensure that the tourism industry does not exist as an extractive industry, which is what it is right now. And it's not sustainable that way, because if the tourism industry just continues to take from the environment and pollute the environment with wastewater, with plastics, with everything else, then what you see happening in some of the islands in the Pacific that have to be closing down their beaches because the beaches have become so polluted and the carrying capacity has just been exceeded, you'll get that happening in St. Lucia. And also the impact of things like climate change, where your beaches now start getting eroded because you're not doing the things that you need to do. We have to understand that with a 238 square mile country, there is a finite amount of resources that we have available to us. And the other thing we have to understand is that these resources have to be shared between the tourists and the local. And what we see happening in many of our jurisdictions, including St. Lucia, is that the tourist has a preeminent position over the locals. So people are getting a little angry. So you go to the beach and the place on the beach that you used to sit is now occupied with beach chairs. And that does not foster a good relationship between the same locals who are supposed to be warm. The local and the visitor. What we need to do is to make the visitor feel as much local as possible, as opposed to, going back to my agriculture roots, an invasive alien species that comes in, takes what it wants, and leaves. So I think that's where the sophistication has to come in with our tourism industry. And there's some that are doing it very well. There's some. I was on a program on Grenada Broadcasting Network last night, and there's a resort in Grenada called True Blue Bay Resort, and I was amazed at what they're doing. But you have resorts here in St. Lucia that are doing the same thing. What Shasni Jade is doing with the way it's managing its environmental resources is amazing. So I think we have to encourage more of our hotels, and the government has to do that. The government has to provide that incentive that makes it easier for your average resort to want to put in the solar panels, to want to encourage people to go out into the communities and mix with the communities. We have to do that. If all we do is just present the sun, sea, and sand experience, then all we'll get is the sun, sea, and sand tourists. But the sun, sea, and sand tourists have so many other places they can go to. If we tell them that the St. Lucia experience is an authentic one, it's one where you can come and visit where Derek Walcott was born, and Sir Arthur Lewis was born, and paint with Dunstan St. Omer's children, or go where Cessin Descartes. And you know who Cessin Descartes is? Learn how to cook the traditional way. So when you go back, a lot of the foods that are available in your supermarket that you never knew how to use, you can use them now. There are things that we can do to cause people to have a lingering taste of St. Lucia in their mouths when they go back. And I think that's where our tourism industry needs to diversify its product, not exclude sun, sea, and sand. Sun, sea, and sand will always be what we are known for because that's who we are. But let's make it more. So let's make St. Lucia sun, sea, sand plus. And let's not just make St. Lucia the best honeymoon destination in the world. Because I think St. Lucia is more than just the best honeymoon destination in the world. There's a richness, there's a cultural diversity of St. Lucia that we have to promote more than just it being the best honeymoon destination in the world. But it calls for a little bit, I don't want to say that because I see one or two tourism people in the room and I never want to accuse them of being lazy, but it calls for them being putting a little bit more effort into it. Don't just take the easy road. Let's develop this country, this nation, so that it appeals more to people. Yeah?
Okay. And I want to build on that point, and because the little that I know, and for those who are involved in the tourism sector in the room can always elaborate on that. But in building the linkages between tourism and agriculture, several of the hotels, they do hire in-house agriculturalists. They have teams of individuals who interface with the farmers. They go out to the farms, they check, they select produce and so forth. Beyond that, how do you see a strengthening the linkage between agriculture and tourism? Because we're simply thinking of it as the hotel, I'm a farmer, here, buy my produce. What else can we do to strengthen the linkage?
Yeah, it's a two-way street, and it's not just the hotel industry, the tourism industry that's at fault. The agricultural sector is also at fault because a hotel wants consistency of supply, and it wants consistency of quality and consistency of volume. So you can't say to your guests that, I'm sorry, there can be no tomatoes this week because our St. Lucian farmers didn't deliver tomatoes. Yeah. There has to be, and that's why the work that Keeflin is doing in getting her farmers to understand agriculture as a business. And it doesn't matter whether you have a first communion today, this weekend, or whether there's a wedding next weekend, that you have a responsibility as somebody who has been contracted by a hotel to produce, that you have to produce. Now, coming with that are a lot of other things. You have to now provide those farmers with the support because farming is a very risky business. Mm-hmm. There's a reason many people don't go into farming is because their risks are not being mitigated. If a farmer loses all of her crop, and I'm saying her because Keeflin is there, all of her crop, what is there to mitigate that risk? Is there any crop insurance? Is there any insurance that's available to the farmer because circumstances outside of her control have caused her to lose her entire crop? there's no farm insurance. There must be some level of farm insurance that allows for risk mitigation, particularly when you get into a situation where climate change is making water more variable. These are things that we have to put in place in order to make the business of farming a business and not just something we say is the business of farming. There has to be greater mediation between the agricultural sector and the tourism sector. And I do not know that the Ministry of Agriculture is the best mediator. In fact, we've seen with the St. Lucia Hotel, well, it's now the Hospitality and Tourism Association. The St. Lucia Hospitality and Tourism Association has done some mediation and has connected farmers with markets. And I think that has worked better than anything the Ministry of Agriculture has ever done. Because the public service, I mean, I worked in the public service. The public service works very rigidly. The public service is not encouraged to be nimble, to be proactive. So there are things, I think government should set parameters, should legislate, but government does not always work as a good intermediary. And I think that's where the private sector, civil society must get more involved, must get more engaged. But we also have to understand, Lisa, that it's not everything that we can grow in St. Lucia. Particularly when you do not have rigid or proper land use policies in place that are keeping intact the arable lands that you have in this country. When you look at the places where we were growing foods before, you look at Cul-de-sac, you look at the Roseau Valley, you look at what has happened to these lands are no longer available for agriculture. You know, so our best agriculture producing lands are now a KFC in Cul-de-sac. That's what it is. Are now being speculated by people who go and they buy them and see if they can turn them over to some factory shell or something coming in. So there has to be policy. If we're serious about agriculture, and if we're serious about being a food secure country, then there are things that we must put in place. Kiefer spoke about water security, and that initiative that she had to provide water tanks to her farmers was an absolutely brilliant one, because if you are a farmer in the Marquis watershed, for example, the Marquis watershed is a very interesting one, because that Marquis River has a very good water flow during the rainy season. But during the dry season, the water in the Marquis River just disappears, and particularly during a really bad dry season. So if you do not provide proper water storage there, all of the farmers and farmers who are farming in Marquis have to abandon all their vegetable production. They just can't get. But the only way you could mitigate that is by providing them with water storage. That has to be something that you incentivize. Government should say that all of these water tanks, duty-free, in fact, go in and make them available as much as possible as a climate change adaptation measure to our farmers. If we do not do that, then farming will never, and agriculture will never be what it should be, and we will never have the food security that is necessary. Now, I did say in my presentation that climate change gives us an opportunity, because there are climate change funds, green funds from the Green Climate Fund that can be used for adaptation in agriculture, in water. We have to aggressively pursue these things and not pursue them as loans, because this is us adapting to climate change. We should never have to borrow money to adapt to climate change. These should be grants, and we have to insist that these are grants that we then pass on to our farmers so that they can do the adaptation that's necessary. But for all of that to happen, there must be planning, there must be heads coming together, there must be collaboration. It cannot just be the Ministry of Agriculture, it can't just be the Ministry of Finance, it can't just be the Ministry of Tourism. Everybody has to come together. And I think that's what's missing in St. Lucia, this joined-up approach, this collaborative approach, this focus. Where do we want to go as a country? In 5, 15, 20 years' time, where do we see ourselves as a country? Nobody has articulated that. If I were to ask you, what will St. Lucia be in 15 years' time? Do you know? Will we be a service-oriented country? Will we be a country that is taking advantage of some of the artificial intelligence? We have kids who are excellent at coding. Are we encouraging them to code so that they can develop the next Waze or the next Instagram? Just one of these children developing an app will totally revolutionize, because that app can then be sold to Google for $10 billion. You know what that does? Just working with Joannan Dujour so that he can now sell his algas fertilizer all across the Caribbean. So you make a millionaire, billionaire out of Joannan Dujour. Some people say, "Gosh, how is Joannan?" But he's a St. Lucian. You make Carlos Noel's solar desal plant, one that is replicated all across the Caribbean. Calais can now employ another 150 St. Lucians to help him manufacture plants. That is what we should be doing. But how are we training? How is our education system gearing us to pursue these opportunities? All our education system is gearing us to do is to pass exams. It's not gearing us to do anything else but pass exams. And pass exams towards what end? To go and work for somebody? Or to migrate? So we must have a picture of where we want to be as a country, and then work resolutely towards that with everybody working together, regardless which government is in power, which is the other thing. That's a big elephant in the room that we never want to speak about. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie 50 First Dates. Any of you seen that movie?
Yes.
Every day when this guy wakes up, he has to reintroduce himself to his girlfriend or whatever because she doesn't remember who he is. So he has to go through this process of recourting her every day. That's what happens in this country every 5 years. We can't do that. It shouldn't matter who is in power in this country. We should have one plan that we move towards. Yes, the two parties should have different positions about how they do things, but it shouldn't vary to the point where you stop and you restart. But that's what we're doing. So we can't talk about powering St. Lucia if we're restarting every 5 years. I'm sorry. So I applaud ECCB for what they're doing, but we have to get our own house together and put our understand where it is that we're going as a country. Otherwise, we will do this. It might not be you, Everton, in 10 years' time. It'll be somebody else, but we'll be having the same conversation. And we're really good. One thing we are in St. Lucia and the Caribbean is really good at articulating a problem. We're horrible at solving the problem.
Everyone is an expert, and we spoke earlier about the talk shows, and there is the armchair experts, but not you, Dr. King. You're not the armchair. You are the expert. Yes.
No.
Yes.
I just wanted to come in on the tourism and bring it to the violence interruption that I was talking about, because I'll give you a practical experience. You remember 10 years ago, Chaussee Road? Mm-hmm. And people could hardly, nobody wanted to go on Chaussee Road because bullets flying, right? But with some violence interruption action, and with the great help of the Chaussee Road leaders, they stopped it. You can go on Chaussee Road now. People can go into Wilton Yard. You can go to Continental Grounds and have a beer. It's no longer a problem. But the rest of society doesn't appreciate that just yet. Now, one of the things we say, how do you sustain peace? Because we can negotiate peace, but it has to be sustained. And it has to be sustained by what we call a positive peace. So we have cruise ships that come into these ports, our Castries port. These tourists want that experience. They want to go to Continental Grounds. They want to go to Derek Walcott's museum. They want to hold a barbecue chicken in their hand and what do they say about a python? A python in the other hand, right? and hey, maybe they want to smoke a joint too. That is the experience, and they want to talk, and they want to speak to people that speak real St. Lucian, right? That's what we need to do. Do you know we're trying to create a Chaussee Road community tourism? We call it Road to Love, Chaussee Road to Love, right? And people are afraid. Not tourists, but us. In this room, if I ask you, why would you all go on Chaussee Road for a eat or a drink? Most of you would say, no, you wouldn't. And that's the problem. And they said that to the tourists as well. So my point being, as we're moving forward, we need to trust our people, have confidence and faith in all of our people. There's no, that is that person and this is me person. You're a St. Lucian, I'm a St. Lucian. We have one destiny, as Jimmy said, a nice vision, one destiny. Let's all participate. Let's all hold everybody accountable. No more war, in no ghetto, and the ghetto opens to tourism. And money flows, and businesses thrive. You want a vision? Maybe go and go to Continental Grounds and sit with Zane Pierre and ask him about his vision for Wilton Yard, and he'll tell you. And you let me know what he says.
But it also speaks to, Dr. King, about the sort of deconstruction that we have to undertake now, because it would seem that now violence is so ingrained in what the modern-day St. Lucian is, We see examples of that all the time over social media. The slightest drop of a hat, someone is ready to beat up someone else because they're looking for respect. So it's difficult. It's a difficult question, perhaps, to answer. And how do we begin to deconstruct that mentality that has become so ingrained? It's great that you spoke about the community leaders. Yes, we did see what happened with the show, say, Wilton's Yard thing, but it had to take a measure of force to actually realize that as well. Pushback from the state, pushback from the police in order to realize that. On the social end, maybe you could walk us through, because you were so integrally involved in that. Deconstructing that mentality, how do we begin to do that? And how do we begin to reach those individuals in order for us to achieve that?
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, what the police can do and should do is law enforce. The police can create what you would call negative peace from the point of view of there's problems, you can suppress them, right? But sustainable peace, positive peace, can only be created by the residents themselves, the community itself. And that's the thinking that government and as a society we must have. We must understand that you will not get peace until you've engaged people positively. Now, how do you do that? And that's why I mentioned the cure violence approach. What you do is you have to have credible messengers. These are the violence interrupters. So in other words, people from the life, people who understand the life, but people who understand the greater vision and they can speak. Because the way you speak to people is you create a safe space for them in a trusted conversation, so we can now explore your concerns, your fears, and your desires. And we can then together work on strategies for you to achieve your success. Because every single human being that I have spoken to always wants the same thing. They want respect, right? They want success, and they want guidance. Every single human being wants that, no matter what walk of life they come from. And that is how you deconstruct, because you go in, you get into the mind through a trusted conversation in a safe space, and you then begin to open the mind to other options. However, this requires society backing, because these other options require that the doors must be opened. The bank doors must open. The loans, the finance must open. The tourism tour operators must open. You know, and whatever you want, we have to open those doors. If we don't open those doors, if we keep those doors shut, and we keep the inequality at this high level that it is, rest assured, more bullets, more blood, right? And that is natural. That is human behavior. You must understand human behavior and human psychology if you want to deconstruct this violence. But it can be done, and there are very clear strategies to do it.
All right.
And we've shown that. Showzero is a perfect example.
Thank you so much for that. Questions from the audience in the room? Yes, sir. Just please go to the microphone, and we have about 6 minutes to be able to get that done. Thank you so much. I hope the rest of you have your questions lined up, right? Yes? I'm seeing some nods. I hope that doesn't mean you're nodding off to sleep at all. No, not at all. Thank you so much, sir. Yes.
Good evening. Is it mic on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening, esteemed guests and personages here. In cricketing parlance, I don't normally open the batting, but I'll do the opening tonight in terms of questions from the audience. This has been well, first of all, let me congratulate ECCB for putting this together. And I enjoyed the presentations by the panelists. Thank you very much. It was very educational. I want to focus on a particular area which Dr. Fletcher, I think, touched on it, and again, also Dr. King, when you said that we also need to have law and order in the society. So My question specifically is, in terms of jurisprudence, is it live and well? Is it healthy in our country? Because at my age, and those of you who are as old as I am, or as young as I am, I think you will agree that there is a perception that in St. Lucia there's lots of lawlessness, and lots of prominent persons get away literally with murder. So what are we doing to address this? I don't know if you would like to, if you can expound or provide some sort of solution or suggestions. I would like to call to mind the country of Singapore. I've done some reading up, and I understand that this is one country that has gone on a campaign to clean up. And by that I mean held the persons who are guilty of corruption accountable, jail them, all right? And what that has done is turn Singapore into a country envied by most. So that basically is the extent of my question.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, Dr. James Fletcher.
Yeah. Like I said in my presentation, order is so important because if you have disorder, anything goes. And you're quite right when you reference Singapore and what Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore. I mean, I'm lucky in that I've visited Singapore and I've seen what Singapore is like. Last year I visited Rwanda, and Rwanda is the other miracle of Africa. What Paul Kagame has done in Rwanda, especially coming out of a genocide where 1 million people were killed in 1 month. 1 million people were killed with machetes, well, what you call a cutlass, cutlasses and guns between tribes. And it had to take serious order and discipline to bring that society back. I'm not saying that we're heading that way in St. Lucia. We're not, thankfully. But you're seeing signs where a lack of order, a lack of discipline is causing serious breakdowns in our society. And it's difficult to build a development, it's difficult to talk about the development of your society if there's a complete breakdown of law and order, particularly of order and discipline. So that's necessary. But for that to happen, people have to understand that it's what I want to happen and you can't stop me because that is my right to do it because I'm living in my country. You know, we live in a country for everybody else, so there are certain responsibilities that all of us must have. I cannot enjoy my rights at the expense of you also enjoying your right to live in a country. So, and I think that is what I see deteriorating in this country a little bit, that people believe that my enjoyment, if it means that you have to take a back seat, then that's okay because that is my right as a Lucian. And I think that is something that we have to teach, and it goes back to our education system. Our education system needs to ingrain these things. I don't understand how we have an education system that is not teaching conflict resolution right throughout the life of a child in school. I do not understand how we have an education system that is not teaching financial literacy from preschool all the way until you leave, because that is where a lot of the bad decisions are being made that cause a lot of these conflicts afterwards. Our education system is, there's this book called Wounded by School by Kirsten Dunst. And that book, there's a quote in that book that I've never forgotten. It said if Rip Van Winkle were to return today, after 100 years of sleep, there are only 2 institutions Rip Van Winkle would recognize, schools and prisons. Think about that, because those are the only 2 institutions that haven't changed. So the whole world is changing around us, it's becoming more dynamic, but we're not changing the way we're educating people. So for me, that order that is required has to go back to education. It has to go back to what we inculcate in the minds of our young people growing up. Because Singapore didn't just become Singapore yesterday. It was a long process where Lee Kuan Yew and his entire cabinet, now granted, Singapore had certain conditions that others didn't have. Singapore was able to, Lee Kuan Yew didn't have to worry about winning the next election. Lee Kuan Yew didn't have to worry about, and in fact, both Singapore and Rwanda have suffered from one thing that people have criticized them for, and that's stifling the press. Because they decided that the press cannot just say what it wants and go out there and just spread propaganda and destabilize what we're doing. So we will control what the press is doing. Now, you try that here in St. Lucia, and you have a totally different dynamic dealing with. So there are conditions that were precedent in those countries that are not available here. But I think we have to, there must be a reckoning that we come to decide again, where do we want to go to as a country? Where do we see ourselves in 15, 20 years' time? Because you see all the good work that Dr. King and Rise and Safe Spaces and people like Tiba and all of them have done, Betty have done in Chaussee and Wilton's Yard, that can unravel in a very short space of time. That is still on a knife's edge, and I'm sure Dr. King will tell you that it will not take much for all of that hard work to unravel and for a whole commerce to blow up in Wilton's Yard. We have to change the environment so that what Dr. King has done in Chaussee can be done in Bruceville, can be done in Barron's Drive, can be done all over this country. But we have to make people want that to happen. It can't be just because Dr. King has gone around convincing people that that's the way you should go. Our young people in Dennery should see that as that is what we want to do because that's the life we're aspiring towards. But if the Gini coefficient is continuing to trend in an area where we have more and more inequality, if people are continuing to languish in remand in our prisons and they cannot have their day in court so that you could actually know if they're guilty or not guilty, if we continue to have a society where people believe that there are two justice systems, one for those who can afford good lawyers and one for those who can't afford a lawyer, then these things will continue to fester. So yes, order is necessary, discipline is necessary, but there has to be a whole reconfiguration of our society, reconfiguration of our thinking, but most importantly, reconfiguration of how we educate people in this country. Education cannot just be about the regurgitation of facts, particularly when these facts are becoming obsolete very quickly because technology, you know, I read something that said that the amount of technical information is doubling every 2 years. And what you learn in the first year in a technical program in university, half of what you learn in the first year of a tech, it will be obsolete by the third year. That's how quickly technology is changing our understanding of things. But yet you want to tell people, you want to teach them back in these old ways and not make them adaptable. Toffler put it very well. The illiterate of the 21st century are those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So you will not, your children and your grandchildren will not get a career and stick in that career for the rest of their life. At some point, they'll realize, boy, I have to learn something new because you see this career that I thought would have lasted me for the next 15 years, it's now obsolete. They're doing something else now. Is our education system making us adaptable? If these things are not being addressed, then that order, that discipline will not happen because people will get frustrated. They will find that they're irrelevant in their own country.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher, for that. Hold on to that thought and let's say, thank you so much for your patience towards the back. What's your question?
I have sat down. I mean, thank you, Mr. Seeley, for the invite today. And the panelists, you have done an awesome job. This has been very thought-provoking. However, I'm going to target Dr. Gardner. At what point, or what do you think St. Lucia is doing right now to educate young mothers on the importance of early childhood education? That's question one.
Okay.
Can you just, one moment, Dr. Gardner, how many other questions do you have? One other question?
One other.
So go ahead and pose it.
Listening to Ms. Carew, I am amazed by the work that you're doing with the Helen's Daughters. And again, donations. How are you seeking, how are you reaching out to community to support you in that initiative? I got to know of Helen's Daughters very, very late, and I've sat down in my seat and I'm burning to assist. So let me know how I could reach out to support you in any way possible to bring Helen's Daughters to another level.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. But let's get to Dr. Gardner-Sadu first.
Okay, to answer that, I think we have a very ad hoc approach, and it's based in multiple different places and spaces, and it's not collaborative. I also think I'm sitting here listening to information about tourism and all those other things, but also the social impact that the tourism industry is having on our people. The single mother is the backbone of a lot of our hospitality industry. And the single mother is outside of the home for hours, 12-hour shifts and longer because of transportation. And then we have, you know, our village is not the village of yesteryear. So we have ad hoc supervision happening, sometimes older siblings, sometimes grandparents, sometimes unavailable persons. We have a lot of screen time babysitting. That's another big threat that's happening to our children that is completely derailing their development. But my clinic now is filled with parents who are shift workers and in the hospitality industry, and mothers who are on cruise ships, with a breastfeeding 6-month-old, and they're leaving because they can go make money. And obviously it derails their children's development. So we are not doing anything, well, not anything, but I don't think we are doing what we need to. And the highest rate of return was in prenatal education, right? So this was studied, and we can then look at the impact on those children later on with increased employment, decreased incarceration, less special education required, all of those things. But I don't think we have a cohesive, collaborative approach that we need. And the answer all of us are coming back to, we need to get together, figure out where we're going, and we need to plan it multi-sectorally.
All right, thank you so much for that. And Ms. Carew, on the question of how do you reach out to communities for assistance, the volunteers are in the room.
Well, I will go into the volunteers, but in terms of donations and so forth, I think I just wanted to make a point about the financial structures of civil society organizations and NGOs. As I mentioned, going into the NGO sector and CSO sector, I've noticed that for a long time we weren't focused on sustainability. So what you found was some of the older agencies, there was almost like a rat race for funding, grant funding. And like I said, projects have a start time and an end time. And for us, we're trying to create an organization, something that can benefit women and families for decades, which is why we were very intentional with our funders. Last year, we were lucky enough to be one of the grant recipients. There's 2 of us from the Clara Lionel Foundation, which is Rihanna's foundation. And what it provided us with was unrestricted funding, not millions of dollars like many like to think, and it was only for 1 year. But it showed the importance of a funding agency like that, because it showed that, again, like Dr. Fletcher mentioned, working in agriculture, you work in climate adaptation and climate resilience, and these are things that you are combating, not because of us, but because of the global north. So it's a constant struggle of trying to adapt and be resilient to after effects that we're not actually participating in. And like Dr. Fletcher also mentioned, that money, I'm sorry, it's owed to us. It's reparations as far as I'm concerned. So it shouldn't be loans. It should be grants. And again, we are looking at foundations and other donors that focus on these types of things. How you can help. One of the things that we notice is in terms of being more of an agile NGO, when the troughs happened, we were able to support through donations. The water tanks, thankfully, were covered. But what we noticed was that we needed to establish an emergency fund because, yes, we prepare proposals and so forth, but I can't predict a hurricane, or I can't tell a donor that there's going to be flash floods in November. But I can prepare the organization to have a fund set aside so that perhaps when a local entity takes maybe 3 months to give out vouchers, we can do so within weeks. And finally, I think the other type of support is supporting your local farmers, supporting our farmers markets, or some of the other interventions that we participate in. So there's several ways, and thanks for the offer.
Thank you so much for that response, and we will be taking our final audience question. Thank you so much, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I do not have a question per se, but just a comment. I heard most of the sectors named tonight, but one of the sectors that I have not heard is the shipping sector. And when I look at the shipping sector, it is one of these sectors that is very important to the economic development of St. Lucia. When you talk about agriculture, you need a vessel, you need an airplane to get your cargo out of St. Lucia. When you look at raw materials, you need the logistics sector to get your raw materials into St. Lucia. I recall at one time, St. Lucia did over 300 TEUs of cargo, transshipment cargo out of Beaufort Port. And we lost that to Jamaica. And right now, you see what's going on in Beaufort. When I looked at the logistics sector, it actually is one of the sectors that drives our economy. Dock workers, you can get persons who can be employed in terms of crane operators, shipping agents, just name it. I recall being stuck at Buckeye Terminal 1 during the pandemic when I went out to clear a fuel vessel, and I was told that I could not get a pass to leave the terminal because I am not an essential worker. But I'm saying, hey, I'm clearing a vessel to provide fuel for the country, but I'm told that I'm not essential. When I look at the logistics center around the world, the shipping sector, during the pandemic, the shipping sector made the most money. The Amazon Logistics made the most money. The CMA CGMs, and to name a few, they made more money in shipping medication throughout the globe. We talk about Singapore. Which sector you think that is driving the economy in Singapore? The shipping sector. So I just want to throw this out here tonight that when we talk about development, you talk about crime, you can get jobs for the sector. I, for one, have sponsored quite a few youth and sports activities through my company within my district, and I see my parliamentary rep here. And when you look at the South Castries area, I looked at the Bexar-Cul-de-Sac area as a flat area that can be transformed as an economic zone for St. Lucia. When I look at Beaufort, we have a lot of flat land. Are we using that sector? When I look at St. Lucia, our geographical location, we are right there in the middle of the Caribbean. We can transform St. Lucia into a transshipment zone. I'm just throwing this out so that we could think. So when we talk about tourism, we talk about agriculture, we talk about jobs. Even now, Jamaica, Trinidad, they're training the youngsters in the schools. They're shipping courses, they're logistics courses, courses for in terms of working vessels, engineering. This is a broad sector, but this sector should not be left out of the conversation.
Thank you so much for that very thought-provoking. Very, very, very relevant. And Dr. Fletcher, you were talking about how do we define, how do we see St. Lucia in the next few years. That certainly is a cue of what direction we should be going. Time has definitely gone by. Minister, would you like to make a brief contribution? I'm not putting you on the spot. Yes, you can decline and have private conversations, but I'm affording you that opportunity. We can have a mic brought to you if you would like to do that. Can we have the mic brought to the minister so that he can give us some parting words?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister, for obliging.
Thank you very much. Let me say good night to all of you and the distinguished panelists. Of course, the comment made by the previous speaker, I think this was very much awesome and tremendous and provoking. I just want to commend the two ladies, and I do have a lingering question to Dr. Karu, not Dr. Karu, you said you're not a doctor. The question that stayed with me was, so many of the children are not going to preschool. I'm hearing it from a medical doctor who's supposed to be seeing children. And there was a story that that doc presented, and I was wondering, is there some correlation between children being seen by the pediatrician and attending preschool. Is there any data to show that those who attend preschool are the ones who are actually seen by the doctors? And
So that's a
if-
question for Dr.
That is
Gardner.
a question for
Dr. Gardner.
Yes, and the other comment I would like to say that we speak of education, and I'm asking myself that where did I receive my education, whether it was at the formal school or at home and on the streets. I think a large part of my education was from home, from the streets, from the church. We have a very important lecture here, and I see those of us who are benefiting from this lecture as part of the society, a demographic of the society. I try to imagine if similar lectures were just common in Kalisak, Masha, where people are exposed to always be discussing issues, to what extent that education of our people can be realized and we can achieve. If there were NGOs that taking each thematic area discussed here and championing it just like RISE. So if there was an NGO responsible for championing the issue of early childhood education and carrying the banner and speaking on the talk show and say, when will all of the children, if there's a voice for these children not going to school, would it make a difference? If there was an NGO for the green energy and for the environment leading, to what extent that would make? Because it seemed what is making the noise are those who go on the talk show and they make the news and that's what's discussed for the day. I think there's an opportunity to educate our society by lectures like that finding its way through the ordinary people in our society, not just at Waterfront in this tourist-looking place, but in some of our community centers in other communities. But I really want to thank the panelists. This is really rich. I'm happy that I came to listen. But Doc, I would like for an answer to this question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much, Minister Honorable Joachim Henry. Dr. Gardner?
I think to answer the question, a little bit of information about the sector. There's, I think, 36 government daycares, preschools, and 94, 95 private daycares. So the sector is largely private sector driven. So to access preschool, majority of the time, you need money. So it again points back to the inequality. I don't have any specific data of persons who access pediatricians, access preschools, but if you can access a pediatrician privately, you have a certain level of income to be able to access preschool. But we do, however, have a very robust community pediatric service with our nurses providing, majority of vaccines, developmental screening. So we've been able to develop a system where we have surveillance and screening in the communities for children with developmental delays, and then they get referred on to the NGO that I run. But I also wanted to tackle your other point that NGOs, it depends on what you're doing. We're in service delivery, and we cannot be in advocacy as well because we're, our referrals are increasing and increasing every year, and yes, we get calls all the time to be drawn to go on the talk shows and to do that. But we have to stay focused on what's the primary objective, which is, delivering early intervention for children with disabilities. But that's why it needs a coordinated approach, because it's all of our jobs to care for our most vulnerable and for those who cannot access preschool and our disadvantaged kids and our children with disabilities. And to support those parents, because they need the financial support, the psychosocial support, they need all of it. We have to pour into those children and their families because they really are at a greater disadvantage than the rest of us.
Thank you so much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end. And while the original plan was to have individual panelists give the final thought, I am now going to use all my powers and nominate Dr. King to give us the final thought.
Yeah, good choice. I talked about it.
So you can remain seated, Dr. King. That's fine. You're right, so that's fine. So you can, but you only have 90 seconds. I'm still being 90 seconds.
This was exactly the nightmare that I didn't want, and the dry run, we said this wouldn't happen. I think it's time for us St. Lucians to develop some courage. Courage means we must live our life wholeheartedly. It's time that we must not be driven by fear. Too many of our decisions, and too much of our policy, and too much of our law enforcement is a fear-based approach to our people and even our development. We must change that. I think we must have faith, which means that we must have faith that if we do the right thing, the right things will happen. And that comes from having courage. And it is time that we all come together from all walks of life with looking straight at one another, not down, not up, right? And we embrace the diversity, the richness of our diversity, the richness of our ideas, and we create what we were talking about a bit earlier, that trusted, safe communication. So people from all walks of life feel comfortable sharing what they think should happen and can happen, and then what they can do to make it so. That's the only way this country is going to go forward. It does mean, you said about transformation, we need transformative leadership in this country. All the countries that do well, you mentioned Singapore, you mentioned Rwanda, you can mention others. It requires transformative leadership with good vision and with the humility to listen and embrace everybody from all walks of life and make a coherent, synergistic plan and way forward. That is what we need. And I think that's what everybody on this panel said.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you very much, our wonderful spokesperson. Now we've come to the end. Ladies and gentlemen, truly it has been a wonderful evening of thought-provoking discussion and recommendations for our sustained development. It is now just a simple task of saying thank you to our panelists for sharing your expertise. It is indicative of your commitment to not just self, but country and region. Thank you, Your Excellency, Sir Cyril Charles, for gracing us with your presence this evening. Thank you to Minister Honorable Joachim Henry as well. And we do have Ambassador, Her Excellency Life Escalona with us. Thank you so much, the Ambassador of Venezuela to St. Lucia. Thank you for listening intently and for your participation. And we hope tonight's contributions can in some way positively influence policy direction in St. Lucia. I want to say thank you to the ECCB for crafting a lecture series that challenges us, the people, to think critically about our futures. To the Deputy Governor, Dr. Valda Henry, thank you for your words of guidance. To Governor Timothy Antoine and the entire ECCB team at the headquarters in St. Kitts, a big thank you. And there is an even bigger thank you to the St. Lucia office, headed by Mr. Everton Seeley, who has been thorough, patient, and laser-focused in preparing for tonight. Thank you so much. Will the calls now end? I don't know. Thank you to all our invited guests and to you, our viewing audience. Thank you to all our media partners who made this broadcast possible. And let me inform you that the next panel discussion in the ECCB's 40th anniversary lecture series, that's going to be held on May 31st in Grenada. The theme, medical tourism, prerequisites and prospects, blue, orange, and green economy. So please be sure to tune in and support. Maybe we'll be hearing a lot more about shipping in that conversation over there in the blue economy. So this is the end, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. I have been delighted to be with you. My name is Lisa Joseph. We do have refreshments for you that's being served in the lounge to the right here. And in observance of protocol, please let us allow the exit of the Acting Governor General, followed by the dignitaries. Please stand for the exit of the Acting Governor General. Wonderful evening. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been great. Thank you so much. And please enjoy the refreshments. Have a lot on me.
Jimmy,
Nice to see you again. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Well, no, it's just nice to see you, and thanks for the encouragement as well.
I just felt like you
have nothing more to do than continue shining.
I had a great time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't want to stop.
I'm glad because I'm like, I'm not
Build the vibes with the CCB for a lifetime. ECCB 40.